expecting Alex de Ruyter, the director of the Centre for Brexit Studies, to be here. I'm afraid he's been ill for the last couple of weeks with perhaps you know what, which we'll try not to mention today. I wish we could say the same thing about Brexit, dare I say it, even though it's given plenty of sort of interest over the last almost 5 years. And dare I say it, it's hard to believe that in another 4 months, indeed, we'll be celebrating the anniversary of the referendum result. And who would have believed that sort of at this point we'd still be sort of grappling with the sort of the complexities of what Brexit will mean for the UK economy. But quite clearly, the nature of today's event is to talk about Northern Ireland. And indeed, anybody with half an ounce of sense would have known that any potential sort of leaving of the sort of the UK from the EU was going to have a dramatic impact on the whole of the UK, but in one particular part of it, and that's Northern Ireland, which of course is the sort of point of interest today. From a personal perspective, yeah, I've got very close connections with Ireland, so I've sort of seen the sort of the last half century and all that that's brought with it. So of course that, dare I say, is very much the sort of the backdrop to everything that goes on. And indeed, we'll probably talk in passing about the sort of the fact that sort of the Good Friday Agreement, which of course had almost been, dare I say, forgotten, has of course been sort of come to the forefront in this. And Brexit has been certainly in terms of Northern Ireland been one issue that the Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister, of course, resigned. That was David Cameron. He had the good sense to realise what was ahead, left it to Theresa May, whose tenure was blighted by the issue of trying to sort of square the circle of Northern Ireland. And of course, we now have Boris Johnson. And even though we left the EU just over a year ago on the 31st of January, the whole of last year was taken up by the sort of the so-called free trade agreement, and of course part of that was the sort of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which of course Boris Johnson agreed to very early on in his on becoming leader, which of course is what's that interest in the sort of the trade that flows in between, of course, the sort of Great Britain across the Irish Sea, and of course with the sort of the rest of the EU, because of course, you know, it goes without saying, the big issue here is how to sort of deal with the sort of border between the only land border, dare I say it, between a part of the UK and the EU, which of course is now an international frontier. But of course, the sort of the complication of what I mentioned a couple of moments ago in terms of the sort of the conflict that sort of raged in the sort of the late 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and dare I say it, from a personal point of view, it seemed intractable. So that was a sort of minor miracle. Anyway, without further ado, it's the sort of the job of the speakers to sort of to fill in the sort of gaps, and of course everyone that's watching will have a chance to ask questions later. So what I will do, I'll just very quickly go through sort of the schedule, and I'll do the sort of this speaker bios at that point. So at 9:05, we're going to have Graham Brownlow. At 9:20, we're going to have Aodhán Connolly, or Michael Connolly. At 9:35, we're going to have Vicky, Pryce. And at 9:50, we're going to have Les Budd. So the aim is that each of the speakers gets 15 minutes. And I will keep to sort of to time if I may, because of course we do want to sort of to give us as much time as possible for the viewers to sort of pose questions to the sort of the distinguished panel. So that's important. So if you could, the speakers keep the time, that'd be brilliant. But I'll look after that. So again, without further ado, what I'll do is I'll just very quickly run through the sort of the bios in sort of the order that they're appearing, and then we can actually sort of get into sort of listening to what they've got to say. So Dr. Graham Brownlow, Senior Lecturer in Economics at Queen's Management School. Since 2012, has been editor and co-editor of Irish Economic and Social History, and in 2019 was Economic History Society Annual Conference Plenary Lecturer. Apart from research into historical topics such as the rise and fall of John DeLorean, gosh, I owe to have one of those cars these days, that must be worth a fortune, and the institutional economic history of Douglas North. Graham has published on contemporary economic issues, including devolution, rebalancing, industrial strategy. I knew I'd have to say at some point, COVID-19 and Brexit. His research has been profiled in the Wall Street Journal, has contributed to expertise to BBC television news and radio documentaries. He's worked for the Government Economic Service and fund management prior to earning a PhD, and has previously held academic posts in Dublin City University, University of East Anglia, and Auckland University of Technology, and since 2018, Graham served as Social Science Committee member in the Royal Irish Academy. You're very welcome, Graham, and we look forward to hearing from you. The next speaker we'll have is Aodhán Michael Connolly. Of course, has become one of the stars of sort of Brexit in Northern Ireland. I believe he has regular pitches every day on TV and radio. So yeah, Aodhán is very well known in that part of the world, but of course is increasingly well known over here as well. He's director of the Northern Ireland Retail Consortium, responsible for engagement with the Northern Ireland Assembly. Westminster Europe has been to the fore of Brexit debate for Northern Ireland's retail consortiums, Fair Deal Consumers Brexit campaigns, work for the government at all levels to champion 21st century high streets, including on planning reform, regeneration and future strategy. Part of the UK government's Joint Consultative Committee on Customs Northern Ireland, and also the Business Engagement Forum, part of the government's Committee for Alternatives, or for alternative arrangements for the working group, as a panel member for the Northern Ireland Food Certification Committee and convener of the Northern Ireland Business Brexit group, if I get the words out, sorry. So Aodhán, you're very welcome. We look forward to hearing from you. Those who sort of regularly tune into Brexit studies events will know Vicky very well. She's actually a visiting professor at Birmingham University. But she was also the Chief Economic Advisor and Board Member at the Centre for Economics and Business Research, previously being a Senior Manager Managing Director FTI Consulting, Director General for Economics at the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills, and Joint Head of the UK Government Economic Service. She was also a partner in the accounting firm and consulting firm at KPMG. After senior economic positions in banking in the oil sector, she's held a number of academic posts and is a fellow and council member of the UK Academy of Social Sciences, a fellow of the Society of Professional Economists, and a companion of the British Academy. I'll turn my page over of management. She's also a member of the advisory group for the central banking think tank OMFIF and of the economic advisory group of the British Chambers of Commerce. And she's held a number of academic posts and has written a number of books, including Greek economics, and the subtitle of that one, it's rather complicated, and also carried out redesigning manufacturing with another academic colleague, Beverly Nielsen. And then finally, Les Budd, who's not yet appeared. We're having slight issues and hopefully we'll get those solved shortly. Les is the professor of the regional economy at the Department of Public Leadership and Social Enterprise at the University Business School, an economist internationally known for his work on regional and urban economics in the context of global issues, the digital economy, the socioeconomics of Brexit, and evaluation of the socioeconomic benefit of space exploration. Currently Director of Space Exploration and Analysis Research Cluster in the Faculty of Business and Law, and Visiting Professor at the Centre for Brexit Studies at Birmingham City University. Author of a number of books, including Global Finance, The Digital Economy, Electronic Governance, Urban Studies, Devolution of the UK Economy, and the Political Economy of Brexit. He's also a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences, Chartered Member of the Institute of Transport and Logistics, a former chair and current fellow of the Regional Studies Association, and is present chair of the Urban and Regional Economic Seminar Group at the Open University. Right, okay, that's all of that's done. So I think without further ado, we'll get right into the speakers. So if I could invite Graham to give his talk, please.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I wish Alex well. Okay, so in 15 minutes, I want to give a little survey of some thoughts on Brexit and Northern Ireland economy. And I think the right starting point for a number of reasons is Gareth Fitzgerald, who began his distinguished career as an academic economist at University College Dublin. Legend has it during an Irish cabinet meeting when some colleague was been very lucid and suggesting some very practical solution to one of Ireland's many problems during the 1980s. Gareth, invoking Walter Heller, famously said, "That's all right in practice, but what about in theory?" And I think a lot of the issues that arise from Brexit and the Northern Ireland economy are actually questions where I'm afraid the rubber meets the road in terms of theory and practice. So what I want to do very briefly in the next 15 minutes is outline issues of data gaps, because I think there's big issues of data gaps. And data gaps, I do think, are issues. However, we can fill in the blanks, the data gaps, with a bit of economic theory, good news. And so what I want to say in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to look at three aspects. So I'm going to think about the counterfactuals. I'm an economic historian by inclination, and we deal a lot in counterfactuals. So I want to think about counterfactuals. I want to summarize some of the arguments from my Economic Observatory paper of Esmond, Bernie, on the Northern Ireland and Brexit, and talk about that piece. And last but not least, I want to make some observations about the best of both worlds arguments that has emerged about Northern Ireland becoming a hybrid, what I've called a hybrid economy. And I want to say that there is a danger that some of these comments are, I'm afraid, wishful thinking, every much as so as the wishful thinking that I'm afraid Brexiteers were guilty of back in the referendum campaign as a piece of economics. There's a paradox, again, linking to recent work I've done and Iverson and Soskis's piece, Democracy and Prosperity, where they observe that the foreign direct investment that's desirable is not necessarily mobile, and the foreign direct investment that's mobile is not necessarily desirable. So there's an issue about the feasibility. Some of the arguments people have been making about the best of both worlds argument that I'll talk about in brief in the 15 minutes, and then far more detail in question and answer. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. Okay, so I'll start with the counterfactual. And the counterfactual is, I mean, Brexit, COVID, what the heck would Northern Ireland's economy look like without these twin shocks to the system? And the fact is, even irrespective of had there not been a Brexit and or COVID, Northern Ireland's economic performance would have been very mixed. Okay, Northern Ireland's had a very mixed performance for a very long time. I say this coming from writing the chapter forthcoming centenary history of Northern Ireland. So I've been looking at a lot of the data for 100 years, and the pattern over 100 years is very mixed. If I just look at the most recent data in the last week, the PwC report that people have been talking about, getting very positive spin, 69% of people recommending Northern Ireland as a place to live. UK average is only 62%. But crucially, only 31% of people recommending Northern Ireland as a place to start business. UK average 39%. So I think there, at a stroke, we have a clue to some of the issues that exist. And we could talk about employment rates, productivity rates, unemployment rates, disposable income. There's a whole bunch of numbers that I'm sure other speakers will talk a bit about. All give us a very, very mixed picture. But, there are centres of excellence in the Northern Ireland economy. The fintech cluster, the cybersecurity cluster, the film and TV cluster. Game of Thrones been made in Belfast and throughout Northern Ireland. These are all tremendous achievements in the economy. So again, this suggests an economy of very mixed performance. We have massive problems in the supply side of the economy, even before Brexit. But we have issues that we're trying to tackle. I'm now a member of the Northern Ireland Productivity Forum. This meeting, its first meetings next week. I think we're actually now getting serious analytically about productivity in Northern Ireland. We're no longer simply saying that you can just cut corporation tax and a silver bullet and it will solve the problems. I think, thankfully, after a decade of that dominating discourse in Northern Ireland, I think we've finally sort of banished that sort of argument, I hope. I think it crowded out more sensible arguments about Northern Ireland. So I think, the thing I always tell students when I teach the Northern Ireland economy is Northern Ireland's economy, to understand it, you have to understand there are three processes going on. The first process or set of processes is the problems it shares with the UK economy as a whole, okay? There's nothing policymakers uniquely in Belfast can really do about that. That's a phenomenon of UK economic history we can talk a bit about more. The second is the fact that there are problems in the Northern Ireland economy that are magnified versions of British problems. I think productivity, the large public sector are examples of this magnification effect. And last but not leastly, problems unique to the Northern Ireland economy, the legacy of violence, for example, the border. These are all problems unique to Northern Ireland. There's a danger that non-economists often overemphasize these third sets of problems, okay? I think economists see all three sets of problems. I think non-economists often focus too much on the last set of problems. So that sets me up just to remind you of some of the observations. Again, I can talk in more detail about the data of the paper of Esmond in question answer. What is the problem, going back to theory and practice, about the protocol Brexit, whatever you want to slice and dice it? Well, in essence, we're going back to basic microeconomics, okay? As a piece of macroeconomics, Northern Ireland is obviously, as part of the UK, part of the macro monetary fiscal policy framework of the UK. So it's integrated in macroeconomic terms in the UK. That's unavoidable, okay? But, you know, as independent Ireland showed until 1979, you could be a de facto integrated in macro policy of GB and not be part of the UK. It's only in 1979 that Ireland abandons the peg to the pound, you know, and then becomes pegged to the ERM, euro, etc. So we have a macro fact that unavoidably Northern Ireland is macroeconomically integrated into GB. At a micro level, it's also massively integrated. Okay, so part of the whole problem that's now emerging about the East-West aspect arises from the fact that as a piece of microeconomics, Northern Ireland is far more integrated with GB than it is with anywhere else in the EU or on the island. And of course, we know from basic microeconomics, and this is where things get complicated, and where people, I think, say things that are not completely on the level, because it is complicated stuff. We're in a world of transaction costs. In other words, we move from a world of the neat, what Ronald Coase talked about in his Nobel lecture about transaction costs, the blackboard economics of worlds without transaction costs, to actual worlds with transaction costs. Once you throw a world of transaction costs into the story, we know that transaction costs exist for consumers and producers. And we know that transaction costs alter how resources are allocated. Okay, the whole point of Oliver Williamson's work, for example, winning Nobel Prize, was to show that once you plug transaction costs into your standard theory of the firm, you show that economic organization changes from the benchmark. In other words, the counterfactual of a world with and without transaction costs are two different worlds. Okay? And Doug North showed empirically, I think about 45% of the American economy by 1971 was tied up in transaction costs in some shape or form. Now, what held for America in 1971 holds for the UK 50 years later. Transaction costs are a big part of the economy. And once you start putting impediments into an economy, you're reversing the process of economic integration. You know, all those lectures that I had as an undergraduate in the 90s about economic integration, okay, were all premised upon market models of single European markets, taking transaction costs out of the system, making markets work better, improving economic performance. We're now in a process of reversing that process by throwing wedges into the system, okay? And the East-West part of the economy is really important. So we know, going back to the transaction cost story, that supply chains have to adjust, okay? That's painful and not immediate. And that, we know that how markets clear in a world of transaction costs is they don't clear as in a world without transaction costs. They could clear in a world with empty shelves. They could clear in a world with reduced variety for consumers. They could clear in a whole range of ways. There's a whole range. I mean, we can go on and talk about transaction cost economics, but I don't want to turn this into a lecture on transaction cost economics. You're nice people. And so what this suggests is a hybridization going on in the Northern Ireland economy. It's made to look less like the rest of the UK economy as a consequence. We can talk about the empirics later on. And so lastly, summing up, I want to make the last observation about some of the discussion about best of both worlds. Okay, I think we have to be very careful that the people promoting best of both worlds arguments are not simply producing mirror image arguments of some of the Brexiteers, the economics for Brexit, etc., that we had in 2016. The problem is, in terms of economic impact of the EU, cutting a very long story short, the EU changed the tug of war in the British economy. The sick man of Europe, by injecting competition, industrial relations reform, etc., moved the UK economy towards greater efficiency. Now, Northern Ireland has the greatest problem of productivity and the greatest problem of competition in the UK, and always has done. So Northern Ireland benefited from those mechanisms of tug of war particularly. What we've done by taking Northern Ireland and the UK out of the EU is we've removed those advantages, and so we need other advantages to offset that. So understandably, some people have talked about the best of both worlds, where Northern Ireland is a hybrid, faces towards the EU and faces towards GB. Some people have said, for instance, in the case of pharma, that this will give us a unique competitive advantage. However, just at the outset, I would make the observation that in regulatory terms, we still will see Northern Ireland facing GB regulations in pharma and EU regulations in pharma. So there's no miracle cure whereby Northern Ireland suddenly becomes the pharma centre that some people are saying. When we go back to a world of transaction costs and supply chain, we also have to figure out the fact it's not costless to readjust your supply chain. You cannot simply expect production locations to skip across the Irish Sea from GB into Belfast or elsewhere in Northern Ireland to serve the European market. In some sectors of the economy, that may happen. I suspect in agri-food, that may happen. I think it's less likely in other sectors. I think we'll see very, very uneven adjustments in different sectors depending on the transaction costs, etc. But there's a more profound thing to say. It goes back to my original comments. We know from business about this, capabilities, dynamic capabilities. There's one thing to say you have an aspiration for dynamic capabilities. Okay, it's quite another to actually have those capabilities. And what's true for firms is true for regional economies. Okay, and we also know from all the evidence on industrial policy that a lot of the best industries are not footloose. We're now moving into an era of scale and skill agglomerations in which the really prestige businesses that you want to locate are not footloose. So by definition, once we move to that world where we're talking about the desirable investment is not necessarily footloose, and the footloose investment is not necessarily desirable, we have to be very careful of putting our eggs in the basket of the best of both worlds argument. Northern Ireland's history is full, as somebody who's bored on about writing about DeLorean, etc. Northern Ireland's history is full of ill-conceived foreign direct investment projects, okay? People who came and said they were bringing a project to Northern Ireland to create jobs, and those projects didn't pay off, okay? The long game of raising productivity, of skills, of infrastructure, of putting right the nuts and bolts of the Northern Ireland economy, making it more competitive, making competition work better, making education and training work better, the unglamorous stuff is what Northern Ireland has always needed. And so when I put this all together, what I'm suggesting, I started with Gareth Fitzgerald, and I think I'll end with Niels Bohr. Niels Bohr said, prediction is difficult, especially about the future. And so I think I'll just stop there because you've suffered enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham. For those who've maybe younger viewers who don't know what a DeLorean is, watch Back to the Future. Yeah. Probably the best advert you're ever going to get for a car. But yeah, he actually went to prison. I seem to remember. For
no, he didn't.
He didn't.
No, he didn't. He didn't.
Oh, he didn't. No, he did. Right. Okay.
If he would have gone down for 10 years if he'd been extradited. He didn't extradite him.
Right. Okay. Yeah, not one of the success stories, as it were. In fact, how many jobs was it due to create?
It was due to create 2,000 jobs and did, but they didn't persist.
Yeah, okay.
I'll not go into the ins and outs of it.
No.
My aunt's brother-in-law was one of the designers on it. It's Nick Sutton. Wrote the wonderful book on it.
Yeah. I've got the book. Yeah, nice book.
No, I mean, it was a truly revolutionary car, but using revolutionary financing methods.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. But before we move to Aodhán, I've got a couple of questions, but I'll leave those to the end. But I've had a couple of comments, which I'll read them out, which may be of interest. One is from somebody who lives in Kent. Obviously, he says, "I live in Kent near the N20, and has said that one of the few benefits of Brexit has been the closure of Ireland or Ireland EU land bridge. Obviously, as he acknowledges, partly due to COVID, but largely due to new trading barriers between GB and EU. So presumably you're seeing an awful lot less trucks. And I've certainly seen the reports that a lot more trade is going to sort of go direct from the Republic of Ireland.
His win is other people's loss. So if you look at the port of Holyhead, where they are down 40%, it was 60% at the start of the year. That is that's money that they're not getting. So there are. This is where, and it goes back to what Graham was saying. There's a lot of these things are mirror images of the other, and for every win there is a loss, and it's how to balance it rather than simply taking it as black and white.
No, absolutely. And of course, I'm tempted to sort of say, go and talk to the Cornish fishermen and women for that matter, who can no longer sell their fish in quite the same way, and they're telling a very different story. But we'll talk about Northern Ireland. One actually other observation, it's a question, and I'm not sure about this one, so I'll put it to all of you. So we do have a free trade agreement with Albania. I'm not quite sure what we make of that. Does that sort of make up for the sort of loss of the other trade? I think not. I'm not quite sure what we sell to Albania, but it won't be phenomenal. Okay, well, I mean, I'm going to have to make an apology on behalf of Les Budd. It looks like he's not going to be able to join us, so it will be the sort of the four of us, which will give us a little more time. And makes things slightly more relaxed in terms of timing, but gives more time for some questions and discussion at the end. So actually, without further ado, if I could invite Aodhán to give his talk, and Aodhán, I'm sure you've got plenty to say about sort of Brexit and the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Shy and retiring as I am. Going to start off by saying it's absolutely lovely to see Graham. Graham and I have known each other for over 20 years, back from our time in Queen's University. And I'd just like to say that neither of the two of us have changed a bit. Absolute double images of us in our early 20s.
Aodhán, you need more water in that cup.
More water, less whiskey. No, I do want to start on a point that is really, really important to me. And it's something that Graham said about the best of both worlds. I have never used that as a descriptor or as an adage when it comes to Brexit and Northern Ireland and the Northern Ireland Protocol. The best of both worlds was used under a lot of different, for Theresa May's deal. It was used for the current protocol. It's been used even as far as Brexit itself was concerned back in the very, very early days, if you remember, before the actual vote. To me, that doesn't stack up, because there are always going to be winners and losers in this, especially when you look at that integrated economy that there is in Northern Ireland. So it's untrue and unfair to say about that there is the best of both worlds. There are opportunities. The big challenge for us is to make sure that we take as much as the current business with us, and that is both the challenge and the friction. What I want to do is quickly run through four different areas. I want to look at where we were at the start of the protocol, what came in, what makes Northern Ireland consumers and retail different. Where we are now, we're a couple of months in. What we need going forward, I want to spend 2 minutes on the Shevchevich meeting that I had last week. And then lastly, I want to finish off about the politics of the piece. So I'll stray into that sort of political arena, which is my unfortunate pleasure to be on the periphery of the politics of all of this. So where we are now, you have to, or sorry, where we were, sorry. Firstly, the Northern Ireland consumer, as Graham rightly pointed out, we already have our economic challenges here. Northern Ireland consumer has half the discretionary income of Great British households. That means that any of these cost rises that come through, we can not afford. We have the highest levels of indebtedness, the least levels of financial security of anywhere in the UK. And the retail industry has had a real change over this past, well, basically since the last recession, especially up until Q4 2018, where we had 5 years of consumer deflation. Now, that wasn't just the profit margins were cut. That was a fundamental change in how retailers did business. And what that meant was that they became leaner, that there was less cushion and that profit margins dropped. So when I came into this job, we're talking that there was somewhere about 4.5%, almost 5% of a profit margin. Now you're sitting at about 1.75, 2.25 for some of the big guys. And even during the early days of COVID, when there was a lot more extra costs you know, even as far as those people who were shielding and were still on full wages, it dropped for a couple of the big guys. It dropped below 1%. Now we had a government minister say, "Well, if you're trading at less than 1%, you shouldn't be trading." It's sort of they don't understand volumes anyway. So that's where we are. That's where we were as far as a starting point, with both the consumer and the retail industry not able to take friction. You got to remember that friction equals cost. Where we were at the start of the year, there were a lot of challenges, and I think we need to be realistic, and we need to bring a bit of pragmatism into the current debate. And this sort of strays into politics. We had the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland saying there was no border down the Irish Sea, and yeah, we'll leave that where that is. We also had the Prime Minister saying that everything was flowing completely fine. We then had other people who were going on TV and saying that Northern Ireland had all empty shelves and that it was we were starving. Neither of those is true, and this is where we need to remove the emotion and we need to stick to the facts. The realistic picture was that the average supermarket has between 40,000 and 50,000 product lines. There were only ever several hundred that were missing. There was a choice issue. There was never food shortages in Northern Ireland, and it was disingenuous to say that. The other thing to remember, and I've even read a couple of academic papers on this, which really hone in on those transactional costs that Graham was talking about, and the new frictions and what that meant because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. You also have to remember that at the start of the year, EU to GB for 7 days could not get food through because of COVID. That meant that there was those external pressures. That means things weren't going to Northern Ireland. But it wasn't just that immediate stuff. It was the stuff that came through afterwards, because there were ingredients that weren't going for processing, which meant that there were less stock going through. The other thing is we're in a lockdown in Northern Ireland. That means people aren't eating out, and they have been going to their supermarkets and buying more. That puts pressure on the supply chain. But the other thing, it's not unheard of for us to have, especially in fresh fruit and veg, in January and February, there can be things missing from the shelves, quite simply because at that time of year, we're in the middle of our non-growing season. If you look at, say, lettuce, we buy 90% of our lettuce, 85% of our tomatoes, and about 65% of all our soft fruit and veg come from the EU at that time of year. So this all sort of pushed to put pressure on the supply chain. Now, the thing is, given that there was only ever a few hundred products that were missing, it's a testament to the retailers and to those people who are working in logistics that it actually worked. And I think that those people who are either going one end, it's perfect, or one end that we're starving and things aren't getting through, I think that is disingenuous, and it also pays a real disservice to those people who have been working hard to try and make this work and try and make the solutions work. Now, that's a big point there. We are making our best endeavours to make this work. You have to remember that the business community did not want the Northern Ireland Protocol. I'm on record as saying that when it came out that the Prime Minister did not listen to the people of Northern Ireland and they did not listen to Northern Ireland business. We didn't want barriers anywhere, but it is the law. And we are doing our best to fulfill our requirements within the law. That is what we can do. Where we are now, well, we are coping. And I remember last week I had said that on Twitter, and someone said, "Well, I'm sure you're coping, others aren't." Actually, you know, it's a sliding scale here. There are some people who are finding it harder than others. What I'm taking is from our members and from where we look at it, and our 100 odd members and what we account of as that vast majority of retail in Northern Ireland and in the UK. And there are frictions and there are costs, but they are coping, and it's a testament to their hard work. However, we do see a big juggernaut flashing its lights and coming straight down the tracks on us, and that's the 1st of April. 1st of April, those grace periods end firstly on parcels. You're going to need customs declarations, but more importantly on export health certificates that cost around £200 and take time, money and new systems. And those will be needed from the 1st of April. We have very, very little time to get something sorted. So that brings me on then to what we need as a business community, as well as the day job of the Northern Ireland Retail Consortium. I'm also have the absolute privilege to be the convener of the Northern Ireland Business Brexit Working Group, which it completely continues to amaze me, the fact that we continue to do surveys and work together and represent 85+% of business and speak with one voice. But what we've agreed that we need is stability. That's immediate stability that comes from an extension to those grace periods. And I'll talk about that later on when I discuss the Šefčovič meeting. The certainty comes from a long-term workable solution that is designed and delivered with business, not done to business. Up until this point, the stuff that has been done to business, and we have had to deal with other people's interpretations of things rather than showing actually how it works. The biggest point is simplicity. Now, that simplicity, you got to remember, simplicity removes friction, therefore it removes cost. There is a sliding scale. So at the bottom of that sliding scale, we're talking about things like digitization. So instead of 70 pieces of paper, including your EHCs, you will need one or none. But also that digitization can also provide an evidentiary burden or an evidentiary opportunity, I should say. And that evidentiary opportunity would be used for something like a trusted trader scheme. I hate using that word. We use auditable and certified supply chain. Trusted trader means different things to different people. And what that would do would allow us to provide robust evidence to the EU, and therefore they realise, based on the principle of dead end host, that the stuff going into Northern Ireland will go no further, that there's very little risk, and therefore they should be able to trust that things aren't going to go any further. And on that basis, we should be able to get that trusted trader scheme. Last Monday, and it did not get enough media coverage, was the data adequacy agreement, and that concedes the principle. If you look at when data adequacy was first brought up, which is the time of the UKIM, so late September, early October, a lot of people said it wouldn't happen. But the EU said, here's the evidence we need. The UK went away and got it. And then it was agreed last Monday. And that shows that the principles there, if you deliver the evidence, that the EU can move, and we'll hold them to that principle. The other thing is a veterinary agreement. Now, people talk about New Zealand would be great. 7 lorries a day is all that would need to be checked if there was 1% checks. Only one problem. New Zealand only ships big lots of single commodities, whereas 90% of the supermarket loads are composite loads, with up to 1,500 products on it. But it's a good principle. Then you've got the Swiss ideal. The Swiss ideal is good, but it's also underpinned by 229 other pieces of agreement, and you have to work out how those all come into play. So for me, it's a Northern Ireland style agreement that we need, something that actually works based on the risk, based on the needs of Northern Ireland business and consumers. And the last point on what we need is affordability. And that's not only to keep Northern Ireland business competitive, but to keep costs down for Northern Ireland consumers. On the Šefčovič meeting, he actually, one of the most significant things that he said is that the Article 16 thing was regrettable, and that we will work together to make it work. He also conceded the principle that the Northern Ireland grace periods were there because the principle was laid down that we needed support until a new scheme was in place. My argument to him was that the new scheme was not in place, and therefore we still need those grace periods. It was a positive meeting. It was a positive meeting. He reiterated back to where we were. It was very clear that there could be no permanent derogations, no permanent grace periods, but there could be facilitations. Now, unfortunately, there seems to have been a hardening of attitudes over the weekend and yesterday with the Joint Committee. We did not have that grace period and that we wanted. We didn't have that sort of good news, the white smoke. However, the best that we could have hoped for yesterday, after where the starting point was, and that sort of friction between the two sides, the best we could have hoped for was that we would get a continuation, and that's where we are. Lastly, on the politics of this, we are in the middle of a game of football between the EU and the UK, and Northern Ireland is the football, and that is most painful to us. There's an awful lot of people talking about Northern Ireland and making decisions about Northern Ireland that don't particularly understand Northern Ireland. The big thing that I've been saying to the EU for this past year is that they need to work on hearts and minds, and that's across communities, because this isn't about that vote in 2024. This is about a vote in 2022. The Assembly elections will determine the makeup of the Assembly who take that vote in 2024 on whether or not to keep Articles 1 to 5 of the Northern Ireland Protocol. So for me, the EU has missed a trick, and the EU should have been working on this a lot harder. But again, last year should have been a technical process. The transition period was a complete misnomer. Mind you, it sounds better than calling it the protracted negotiation period, which is what it actually was. The politics here in Northern Ireland, you will have noticed, is that the heat has been rising. For us in business, this isn't about politics. This isn't about constitution. This is about making our economy work, and that's what we will continue to do.
Thank you, Aodhán. That's brilliant. Before we sort of move to Vicky, just a couple of comments. That there's one here. Somebody called M. The Article 16 thing, of course, just you mentioned that in passing. That's the whole issue about sort of vaccines, and that they. What is the sort of view? Do you think, Graham and Aodhán, was that didn't come from the top? That the sort of the story I've heard is that was an overzealous civil servant, if you like, within Brussels, who decided this on sort of late on a Friday afternoon. It kind of escaped before they could sort of squash that.
It depends who you talk to.
Right, okay.
It did come from a civil servant. It was high enough up to cause the damage, right, but also high enough up to not get a public knuckle wrapping.
Yeah, okay. Just to actually finish the comment, yeah, the Article 16 thing might have been regretted, but its set of precedents is much more serious than it's been acknowledged. And I think we'll all recognise that that relationships are absolutely essential in going forward. Incidentally, I'll come back to M. Actually, sort of makes this. It's Dennis McShane, the panelist. That Barnier told me that Johnson came to ask for a deal when he became PM. I offered him the deal Mrs. May turned down, which was essential in the view of the 27 member states and Washington, that peace could not be threatened by the customs checks on the 1921 partition border. Johnson accepted this and won in December. Again, I suppose that's very straightforward. Although, of course, he tweaked May's deal, which, of course, this is about the politics, as we are fully aware. There are indeed difficulties. And you're absolutely right, Aodhán, making this thing work, because of course, my sense of everyone I speak to is that they want a better future for them, and more particularly their children, and that's absolutely essential. It's about jobs, prosperity. But hey, that's what Brexit was supposed to be about, and lots of people voted to leave on the belief that that's what they get. I'm just quickly flicking through the comments. Thumbs up, Aodhán, for talking about the sort of the trusted trader scheme. That is definitely seen as the sort of the way forward. Oh gosh, I think I'll leave it. I'll come back to these later on because some are slightly complicated and quite extensive. So, right, actually, what I'd like to do at this point then is to sort of come to Vicky, who will be the sort of the last of the sort of the panelists today. And Vicky, as you remember in the sort of the introduction, is an eminent economist and sort of commentator. So Vicky, without further ado, if you could give us your sort of views about sort of Northern Ireland and its economic prospects.
Thanks very much. I'm going to share a screen. I'm going to show a few slides just to remind everyone what the Northern Ireland economy is like and what the issues are that we're discussing right now. Of course, there are serious experts on the panel on Northern Ireland itself, but I like to look at it perhaps from a more UK perspective, if I may. So I'm going to try and share my screen. With a bit of luck. And I think I'm sharing. Am I sharing?
It's showing a sharing, so I think we need the first slide. That's not, yes, it did. Oh, right, great.
Has it?
Yep, I've got it now, yep.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Now I can see it on the screen as well. Oh, but that's brilliant. Well, we have been hearing, of course, a lot about the protocol and what it means, and it's just worth reminding us that, which way, checks occur, and when they're dispatched from one part of the UK to another. Of course, the GB Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland GB trade, that is what we're looking at, but also, of course, the ability to sell goods into Ireland just as easily as before, given that, of course, Northern Ireland stays very much within the remit of the EU for trade under the protocol. And I think what we've been debating for a while is whether the protocol is actually giving long-term help for the economy because of this hybrid model that we've been discussing. In theory, it should. I mean, it doesn't show up, barring all the early problems that we're discussing, that Northern Ireland businesses can continue trading more or less as they did before, both with the EU and with the rest of the UK. It does mean that an IUU trade does not require additional checks, controls, or documentation. There was a discussion from Graham in particular about what it means if you add friction to anything that you do. Of course, as we know from the overall UK perspective, that's a serious problem because we have added so many checks for anything that's going to the continent, and that has had an impact on trade already, and of course it increases costs for consumers, and that of course is negative for growth overall, and that's basically what most forecasters had been worrying about. But nevertheless, it looks from here, and I'm speaking of course from London, that there are some extra benefits that Northern Ireland has had as a result of this agreement that the rest of the regions don't actually have. And then, of course, there are the underlying strengths. I mean, I know there are lots of weaknesses, but the underlying strengths of Northern Ireland, it's got, strengths in healthcare, life sciences, engineering, and of course, there's already mention of the cybersecurity, software development centres, and also fintech, which has attracted quite a lot of interest. So the theory would tell you that they should all benefit from this dual approach, and also the regulatory alignment with the EU. A lot less tension than what we're experiencing in the rest of the UK. And what is more, there have been some very positive developments in the last 5 years. Again, there was a mention of investment more generally. I mean, FDI seems to have increased. There are more FDI jobs per head over the past 5 years than any other UK region. And we've seen some really interesting companies arrive in Northern Ireland. But there is no doubt that the economy has consistently lagged behind what the rest of the UK has done. There are lots of comparisons about where Northern Ireland is in relation to per capita GDP with the rest of the UK. And indeed, there is no doubt that it is way below the average. And it has, of course, required quite a lot of spending and support and subsidies coming into Northern Ireland. Of course, that has been accentuated by what we've also heard, which is persistently low productivity and competitiveness is really what I meant to say about the last sort of point there. Nevertheless, I mean, the points that were made earlier about whether this dual sort of system that we have, this hybrid system, will really be to great advantage of Northern Ireland. It's disputed if you look at, for example, at what the National Institute has calculated. I mean, what they did is they looked at the latest, at the Johnson deal, and itemized it according to what it would mean for the regions. And this is an estimate of the difference in GDP, how much lower GDP would be in the long term, which they calculate as 10 years, by comparison to where we would be if we hadn't left, including the agreement on the Northern Ireland Protocol. And as you can see, Northern Ireland isn't really particularly different to anyone else. It suffers almost just as much. So the question is, how much extra has this deal given to Northern Ireland? But on the sort of macro calculations over a period, it looks like not very much. And the interesting thing is, of course, you know, when you look at how Northern Ireland generally operates, what you find is that it is very, very similar in terms of the trends to what is happening in the UK economy as a whole. And those are the latest figures on the third quarter of the year, when we saw this big improvement in the economy overall in the UK. The interesting thing is that the percentage increase was exactly the same, well, more or less, in the quarter. If you look at the economic index, 15.5%, it was by 16% in the UK as a whole. So very, very similar. And then you see the differences, of course. I mean, the one surprising element is perhaps that the public sector wasn't doing particularly well, even though it was doing well in the rest of the UK. But you've seen construction growing, production more generally, and services because, of course, of opening up for a while. So pretty similar trends. And you see that in manufacturing. If you look at at what's been going on in the last few years and also quarters, yes, there were some small differences in the earlier part of the last decade. But if you look at what's been going on in the period since the pandemic hit, it's pretty similar. That's manufacturing, and that's services, of course, which had fallen very significantly for a while and then recovered. So that has been pretty standard, following more or less what has been going on elsewhere in the last few quarters. But the interesting thing is that there are some differences that exist. And the question is whether one of the reasons why the overall impact of Brexit seems to be similar in Northern Ireland than as in other places is more because actually the fall might have been even worse or perhaps wouldn't have been as much if Northern Ireland hadn't had peculiarities in terms of its employment and productivity, as I mentioned before. So maybe that deal does give it an extra push, and the impact of Brexit might have been bigger otherwise, given that there are some peculiarities in the employment position. You can see here in particular the inactive number. The strange thing about Northern Ireland, of course, the experts know it and have to deal with it all the time, is that if you look at the period between this October and December 2020, Northern Ireland had the lowest unemployment rate in the UK and the highest inactivity rate in the UK. So that, of course, accounts quite a lot for the overall lagging behind in terms of GDP per capita. And the question is whether any of the changes that we may be seeing because of the different nature of where Northern Ireland is within this Brexit agreement might make a difference in this, might in fact make Northern Ireland look more attractive in the future, might do something about this inactivity rate. But because the country has lagged behind quite significantly, what it does is it does receive quite a substantial amount of spending and transfers into its economy. This is the overall figure, and what comes into Northern Ireland may look small when you look at this, but if you look at the spending per head, that is, as you can see, pretty high. In fact, it's the highest of any other region. And Northern Ireland has benefited, of course, from that. And the question will be what happens next. Of course, given everything that has been going on, there's a lot of discussion about the sort of political issues that may develop. We're talking here, of course, increasingly about Scotland and what may happen there if there is a referendum for independence. Quite a lot of speculation about whether this Brexit arrangement might end up with Northern Ireland and Ireland perhaps getting them closer together, if you like. And it's interesting to see, how it compares with Ireland, how the Northern Ireland compares, and how important it might be for it, and where it stands in relation to the UK. And I thought I would show you the figures from a couple of years ago, which came out of Eurostat, and also looked at ONS data, and they were put together by the Economist when he was looking at whether perhaps given Brexit, there might be a chance, and what the cost might be if there were to be, even if Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland sort of got together. And it compared national income, population, and a number of other indicators to see how Northern Ireland compared with Ireland and how it compared with the rest of the UK. But you can't actually tell an awful lot from that, but what you can tell a little bit more is what the actual subsidy is that comes to Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. And you can see here that we've all known that it's really London, South East England and East of England. They're the only positive contributors, if you like, to the Exchequer. Everything else gets redistributed. The Economist article had calculated that the subsidy that Ireland will have to put into, if it were indeed to be supporting Northern Ireland in the same way, should they get together, would account for something like 3% of Irish GDP. Now, of course, things change very significantly when bits of countries sort of get together. So it is just a very simple numerical assumption. But of course, it is an important consideration when you think about how things might move in the future. But I'm suspecting that certainly for the time being, I agree entirely with what the speakers had said. Northern Ireland, despite the supposed privilege that it has with this dual system, is going to continue to need support. And yes, I agree entirely that the current grace periods should be extended. Some of the issues that we're seeing now are not just teething problems, but they're going to be here for the longer term. And we can see that Northern Ireland still needs overall and will still need overall support, despite the points that I made earlier about FDI in particular coming in, perhaps more strongly there than in other places, if Northern Ireland is still seen as a gateway to Europe, whereas the rest of the UK will not be. So there are underlying issues. There are some strengths, obviously, but Brexit has brought with it loads and loads of problems, which I think it's too early to tell whether they're just temporary or here to stay. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Vicky. Brilliant. Okay. Right, before we get into the sort of questions, there was one, it was in the sort of the comments, but I think it's worth actually, and it draws upon what you've just sort of said, Vicky, but I'd like to ask it of everyone. It's from somebody in New Jersey. Greetings from New Jersey. What are Northern Ireland's chief exports within GB to Ireland, to EU? I'm just trying to pick that up correctly. So I'll just repeat that. What are Northern Ireland's chief exports within GB? Okay, first question, to Ireland, to EU. Would a free trade agreement with America help GB? Okay, that's the first we've heard of that, and that's part of what the issue is about, sort of the so-called chlorinated chicken question. And what would, if any, impact would it have in Northern Ireland in particular? Any views? Aodhán, you look perplexed, so that you must deal with the chlorinated chicken question every day.
Yeah, so it's sort of it's chlorinated chicken and hormone Frankenstein beef is what we usually get brought up. Those are two products which I suppose people have latched onto in the sort of zeitgeist of this, but there are thousands of other products. For me, the big thing on this is that we need to be able to realise that we are in the single market and that those things will not come into Northern Ireland anyway. And that's exactly the sort of way that we want to keep it. However, as far as what we do with GB, the big thing for retailers is the agri-food. So we buy about 2.8 billion of Northern Ireland agri-food. Yet 60% of that goes via Dublin because of the just-in-time supply chain. So shows that sort of integrated supply chain. We are 1.9 million people in Northern Ireland, but we feed over 10 million. It's getting close to 11 million, and that is hugely important for us. Now, where that is, who we sell that to, you know, the GB retail. The GB retail market is hugely important. There are opportunities that are facilitated by the protocol. We saw one last week, or two last week actually. Aldi and Lidl both signed £500,000 contracts. Those contracts were not only facilitated but enabled by the Northern Ireland protocol. However, this is where we need to see growth rather than displacement. And that is hugely, hugely important. Northern Ireland cannot just recalibrate its markets, and because that is costly, it has transactional costs with it. What we need is to keep the market that we have, sustain and growth. That's not saying that it's best of both worlds. What's that saying is that we need to make the best of the situation that we're in without losing the current markets that we have.
Okay, thank you, Aodhán. Any views, Graham, Vicky?
I would just say that about 60% of exports of Northern Ireland go to the rest of the UK. So, I mean, that's really, really important. And if, yes, of course, one can redirect things, but it is a very, very important route. And if that gets affected significantly, then that's a problem.
Good, Graham? Oh, Graham, you're muted.
I'm just trying to unmute there. Sorry, I was stuck there. Yeah, I mean, this, as Vicky says, the scale of the numbers, I won't go into the detailed numbers, but in terms of the actual composition, thinking about food manufacturing, there is a pattern where some very astute businesses in Northern Ireland have realised that they can't compete brand-wise with the big GB brands. So what some of them have actually done is they've made acquisitions in GB to produce own label. So many own label products in categories like potato crisps, for example, that GB consumers are buying are actually Tato owned, I think through the old Golden Wonder plant. Aodhán can correct me if I'm wrong.
That's absolutely correct, spot on.
Yeah, I teach a third year strategy course. I memorize all these sorts of odds and ends to try and make strategy that bit more interesting. So the point is, the business strategy, you know, I view the older I get, regional economics as a form of applied microeconomics. So I think often when we focus on these macro stats, we ignore the fact that businesses are so mixed up in these islands as a product of the last 40 odd years of European integration, that certainly it's hard to disengage these from the business model. But I think there's certainly, agri-food is very clearly intertwined in a way that I'm not sure other sectors are necessarily intertwined. But remember, like 80% of Northern Ireland's economy is services. Northern Ireland is a service economy. And Northern Ireland's highly successful in consultancy. I mean, the Belfast office and the Big Four consultancies, if not yet, but will within certainly 5 years, be the number 2 office in the UK for all the major Big Four accountancy firms. You know, there's a critical mass of power. You know, Deloitte, a lot of Deloitte's business in Silicon Valley has been done through Belfast. You know, so there's a lot of, again, the thing about Northern Ireland is it's a very, very uneven economy. It has real centres of excellence and does some things fantastically well. And then there's other bits of the economy that, as Vicky points out, you have the lowest unemployment and highest inactivity. And that takes us to the point that a lot of the problems in Northern Ireland are the opposite side of a coin. That's a social problem. They aren't something that can be remedied through playing around with the tax rate or playing around with regulation. They're deep-rooted mirror images of deep-rooted social, political problems.
Structural problems too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, our education system, again, is highlights that. I mean, I could bore on about for an hour about the education system, I won't. But, those sorts of issues. So I think it's important not to lose sight of the actual micro stuff going on beneath the surfaces in those data. I think sometimes the statisticians get a wee bit overexcited about those numbers. Remember, those numbers are, I think, final goods.
So that's a really important point you make there, Graham, as far as the micro. And I tend, and you got to remember that our Brexit campaign was called a fair, and is called a fair deal for consumers. So we're looking at the microeconomics of households. And, there's my, I suppose my driver in all of this has been to keep the cost down and a choice and affordability for Northern Ireland consumers. Now, I noticed David Hoy's put up a comment about small businesses. Now, one of the things in the Northern Ireland Business Brexit Working Group, and again, it goes to that microeconomic model, especially if you're talking about those sort of micro businesses, which you got to remember, Northern Ireland is significantly different from the rest of the UK in the amount of SMEs that we have, and even micro businesses that we have. He's absolutely right. David's absolutely right when he says that there's more cost now, and one of the things that we've been trying to do from day one is to remove the friction in this. We want this to work. We want this little corner of the world of ours to work, but it has to work for the small business as much as it does for the large business. But even for the large businesses, for a lot of them, this is the first time that they have had to do this. John Lewis is a great example as far as, they have been trying to get things online. They've had to build a whole new system to deal with Northern Ireland. A lot of people say, this is not about flicking a switch. This is about actually making sure that it's not even just about a different postcode. It's about things like customs declarations, what happens in April, about outlaying that money to be able to serve the people of Northern Ireland. But I'll push back on one thing that David says there, but small businesses are hit hard and unnoticed. In the Northern Ireland Business Brexit Working Group, we have one of our core principles when I was setting it up was that no sector left behind, and that includes the size as well. So the FSB are very, very strong on this and have been leading the charge. And what we are very keen to do, and even if you look at all of the Northern Ireland Business Brexit Working Group papers that we've put out, even those the 67 questions in reaction to the first command paper, the 82 questions in response to the October command paper, all of those have examples, tangible examples and tangible questions for small business. This is about making the whole of the Northern Ireland economy work in the best way that we can and dealing with the clear and present danger and challenges that we have.
Thank you.
Sorry, does he mean fixed costs? Sorry, I wasn't quite clear. Does he mean the fixed costs? Is that what he's saying?
Yeah, so small businesses are finding it hard to get goods from GB if they're not being delivered or at a bigger cost. Those reselling online find they're not competitive with those selling to GB because GB businesses do not have to bear those costs.
Okay. Because obviously the fixed costs for very, very small businesses are going to be much more painful than for big businesses in Northern Ireland, simply because you can always, at bigger scale, set people to sort things out. I mean, that's why like anti-discrimination law in Northern Ireland, what is it, 25? Is it the 25 is the lower bound?
Yeah.
That's why the principle is that the below 25 employees, the compliance costs of that regulation or other regulations would be very painful. And
that's it, and it's one of the reasons. So if you go back to the trusted trader part, I hate using that. I need to stop using that. What we're talking about is like a simplified AEO, and so the original thing that was put forward, that we put forward back in the day was the retail movement scheme. Now, we didn't call it the supermarket solution, which the government did, which was really annoying because people latched onto that and said they're only looking at the big five and all this, which is absolute nonsense. But if you look at the original plan that we put forward for the retail movement scheme, it was simplified, based on that trust, based on that evidentiary burden that would go on to us, and it would cover the majority of retail, got to remember 70% of the value of everything that moves GBTNI is for retailer shelves. So that, and if you had a green channel, it actually frees up the ports as well. But one of the key things in that for us was that if you are small or micro, that you wouldn't need to do it anyway, because you are that small that you are of little risk, unless of course you are bringing in something to the country which are those originally restricted goods, so and excise goods, so alcohol, cigarettes, fireworks, yada yada yada, that sort of thing. So it's important to recognize the point about small business. It's important to recognize the part that small business plays in our economy, and it's also important to realize that they do need that either extra help or that bit of extra leeway to allow them to function.
Right, I'm going to get to the questions if I may, but one thought immediately strikes me is the sort of the huge complexity in all of this, and of course it goes out saying that when people put their sort of their X in whichever box they went, yes or no, to sort of stay or remain, you know, these are not the sort of the questions foremost in people's minds. But hey, you know, will we ever see another sort of referendum? Which actually brings me on to the first question, and it's well, there's two parts to it, but effectively what they're asking about is the sort of the unity poll. I suspect what they're talking about here is the sort of the border poll. So I'll ask the second part, which I think is more pertinent. Do any of you agree with the idea of having a lead into talks between all the interested parties prior to a poll? I'm not quite sure that would take us, but yeah, any views?
I think we're in a hugely political area, and I can see Graham's head's about to explode. No, I think whether or not a plebiscite is called on this it's above my pay grade. That's up to the people of Northern Ireland. What I can say is that we need to learn the lessons from what has happened over this past 5 years, that anyone who wants to even start a proper conversation on this will have to have a very defined plan. Business likes certainty. Constitutional change is not certainty, and there are always going to be costs and that sort of thing. But we need to it's going to be divisive anyway, whatever way it happens. It is the nature of the question. But to remove some of that emotion, what people need to do is have a plan, learn the lesson. If you sell something, you know, not an idea, but an actual plan. As for whether or not it happens, you know, on the constitutional stuff, I'm you know, it's neither here nor there to me. What I'm worried about is the present, and how do we make Northern Ireland work?
Okay.
I was just going to add, you know, Annie Walker's principle from Rover's Return back in the day in Coronation Street: no politics, no religion. So I think I'll stick to the economics, and I think Aidan's right about the economics of referenda. I mean, referenda, irrespective of what you think of the outcomes or the question in referenda, they are particularly blunt in terms of animal spirits. And I think people have to bear that in mind when they hold referendums. They're very blunt instruments.
A certain M. Thatcher was very reluctant to put anything to the sort of the paper because she recognised that, as you say, they were very blunt instruments.
Graham actually makes a very good point there as far as how blunt it is. Like, Graham and I come from very different backgrounds. Graham and I, even as far as economics is concerned, we don't see the eye and everything. But what we do see is the need to drive things forward and work with what the hand that we are dealt, and be realistic about that. And I think we need more people in that space rather than this sort of visionary space that pulls people apart.
Well, I tried to put something about the costs, and as you probably gathered, I was very careful in what I said, because I didn't want to get into politics. But of course, there is so much more which one could have discussed, such as the differences in their health service, for example, that exist between the two, and how you replicate that, and whether people would be happy to switch from one to the other, or whatever compensation there may need to be in addition to everything else that I've shown. So there are so many issues, and indeed, as has been said, this is a serious issue. Referendums generally are bland instruments, but it all depends, of course, on how politics develop in the country. So yes, keeping away from those politics, but there are quite a lot more economic issues than one could add to the list that will need to be taken into account too. Assuming, of course, anyone votes with any economics in mind, which was clearly not the case during Brexit.
Well,
The Brexit referendum, yeah.
One or two of the comments say exactly that. Actually, it was Aodhán who sort of made the point about the sort of constitutional issue. And actually, we've had Vernon Bolton, of course, as you all should be aware, is one of the sort of country's leading sort of constitutional experts. And the point question he's put is it the case that when the grace period ends in April, customs declarations will be required for goods from GB to Northern Ireland? And if so, is this acceptable?
So for the majority of goods, the customs declarations are already needed. That was the big thing that we had to do by the 1st of January. When you're talking about B2B or B2C parcels, if it's under £135, then you don't need a customs declaration. If it's over £135, you do need a customs declaration, but it doesn't need to be in for the first 3 months. Now that changes. That grace period, which is a HMRC unilateral grace period, will change on the 1st of April, where there will be a need for that customs. As far as the acceptability of it, that's above my pay grade. At the end of the day, we have to deal with the systems that are in place. We can help mold those systems before come in and sort of tell what the effects on business, large or small, is going to be, what's the effect on the bottom line. But as far as the acceptability, that's up to our political masters, I'm sure. There's one other one that David's just put up as far as the trusted trader scheme. That trusted trader scheme doesn't exist. There's two schemes with 3 schemes at the moment. There's the UK trader scheme, which is that one that removes the need for tariffs, the at risk for 98%, which is sort of done away with when the TCA came into to effect. Not a trusted trader scheme. The TSS, the Trader Support Service, that's not a trusted trader scheme either. That is a scheme to facilitate customs, and then you have the customs declaration system, CDS, which is a basic input. So you can generate the codes that you need to move your goods. None of those are, and that's why I'm lax to use trusted trader, because a lot of people put different projections onto it. What we're talking about is an auditable and certified supply chain that at its widest point would take in customs and SPS based on an evidentiary burden.
Okay, I'll keep to the questions if I may. There's one person who's asked 3 questions. I'll ask one of them and I may come back to the other 2 if I get a chance to sort of give others the sort of their fair share. This is as it's written. My view about Northern Ireland is the situation, it is as it is, even if Boris promised otherwise. And Northern Ireland needs to decouple from the rest of the UK and become more EU-centred. Please discuss. And remember, we've got to be finished by 10:30. Right, okay.
Anybody wants to answer a loaded political question? Anyone?
Yeah, you don't have to answer these questions. I mean, that's really difficult. Tell you what, I'll give you another one to think about, but this might be a little more straightforward. We've had a few examples of import substitution opportunities already for Northern Ireland firms. How scalable does the panel believe this opportunity to be? Similarly, displacing Republic of Ireland sales into GB, given lower friction costs?
That is a really interesting question. We have to be very, very careful about what is true substitution and what is cannibalization from other markets that we already have. And it's that sort of, Graham's screwing his face up, he's going to come back on this. So if you look at our home market here in Northern Ireland, there's a great stat from Northern Ireland Food and Drink Association where they're talking about the 3 billion that we would lose out in the UK market for the sake of a few 100,000 here at home. And then you need to build on that with the EU and the Irish market, and that takes a lot of time. I think we need to look at this as Shevchevich, when we were talking to him last week, he's very much trying to sell the benefits of the protocol, and he's saying that not only can sustain current business, but it can help grow business for Northern Ireland. Again, I, as along with Graham, do not subscribe to the best of both worlds idea. I think we have seen some import substitution on some things that we are now getting straight from Northern Ireland. So, for example, those things that people are quite worried about. So on Monday, we had those export health certificates come in for fresh prepared meats. That's things like mince, your pork chops with marinade sauce and meatballs and breaded chicken and that sort of thing. So we're actually seeing, instead of stuff coming through, NI stuff going to GB and being packaged and then coming back, it's actually all being done here. So again, there is chances for import substitution. We just have to be very, very careful about what that means in practice. It cannot be a substitution while losing other things. If it's a substitution and building a market, then let's go for it.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. One other question. Well, okay. You're going to come back on that one, Graham?
Yeah, I was just going to make a few. Just going to thank Alan Brittle there for it. Okay, so the first thing to note is the evidence that was given yesterday at the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. My friend co-author Esmond Burning made the observation when asked something similar. Well, the first thing is there's an issue about data. I mean, as I said in my 15-minute preliminary comment, one of the big issues is that there are data gaps to begin with. We only have 2018 is the most recent trade figures aggregate between GB and I, so there is a lag. There's also issues I know from HMRC, etc., where data is collected and then doesn't seem to get back to Northern Ireland. So there are issues where data is either not collected or data that is relevant is collected and then data does not get back to the Northern Ireland Civil Service in some shape. So that first observation is there are data issues to begin with. More substantively, in terms of import substitution, I'm afraid this is a classic case of the Economist. It depends, and it depends on the basis of the sector. I think in the agri-food type sector of commodity business, so the chicken or pork in sauce, these are essentially commodity products. Those commodity products will be relatively easy to import substitute. You simply move plant from one factory in Lifford to one in Strabane or vice versa, for example. If I think more substantively of more higher value added products, then I think a different dynamic kicks in. The different dynamic kicks in if you look at the high value, high wage, high productivity sectors in Northern Ireland. My concern for them is, say, electrical engineering, is the inputs. It goes back to my earlier point about the microeconomics of how businesses are organised. The inputs of those Northern Ireland-based high-value electrical engineering businesses, they are based on GB inputs. In other words, for every winner of import substitution, which I think will be, to be honest, towards the low productivity, low wage, low skill end, there'll be a loser at the higher productivity, higher wage end. So I think that if you're doing the calculation, and Sol's going to have to do the calculation, it won't be me. When you do the net balance, I'm afraid I don't want to be excessively pessimistic, but it goes back to the point I made earlier on about the best of both worlds. I mean, we know there are no free lunches, and this is no exception to no free lunches. I'm sorry to be so pessimistic in that response, but that's the best I can do. Sorry.
This is why you're not invited to parties anymore.
No, never was.
Sorry, what parties? Do you have parties in Northern Ireland?
No.
Only virtual. Right, a couple more questions if I may. There's one which is quite interesting, and I've got a personal insight to this, but I'll keep that one to myself. Is it true that the major barrier to Irish unification is the low spend on healthcare in the Irish Republic?
That's a really subjective question.
Okay.
It's whether, there are people who are vehemently against it. There are people who are for it. There's people in the middle who yet to be convinced, and their drivers, their push and pull drivers, are going to be completely different. So unfortunately, no one but the person themselves can answer that question.
Well, I touched on it briefly, as you know, and it may well be a major issue, but I think, as Aodhán says, maybe it's more a personal thing for individuals.
The data on that, the recent paper in the Cambridge Journal, and there's a Affairs Journal, Seamus McGuinness and Adele, I think it is. They try and say it's more mixed. The big point is, of course, I think people miss in all these discussions as a piece of economics is the burden is burden per taxpayer. And the simple arithmetic is that there are many more GB taxpayers than Irish taxpayers. So a given subvention, whatever the hell you think the figure is more of a burden for any Irish taxpayer than it would be for a GB taxpayer.
That's an excellent point, and one of the things about when Brexit raised the constitutional issue as it has done, you'll see that there's a lot more talk about how the Northern economy would be better off in the south, or the Northern economy would be better off in the Union, and people using some really skewed statistics on the other side. But it is that sort of. It's very strange now that it has moved over this past 4 or 5 years because of the Brexit issue away from simply a motive and identity politics to economic politics through the lens of identity, and that's an interesting move.
Well,
I have to say that Brexit is a good case in point. People see whatever they want to see. Sorry, Graham, you're about to say?
Sorry, I was going to say years and years ago, 2006, I wrote a book chapter for a book on the Ulster crisis, the Home Rule debates, and I wrote a chapter about the economic arguments by business people, politicians, and academics of the time during the Home Rule crisis between the 1880s and by 1913. And it's rather interesting that it's often forgotten that within the Home Rule debates and pamphlet literature, that economics took up far more space than I think historians are aware now. If you read like the Ulster Crisis, A.T.Q. Stewart's 1967 book, which is like the standard account, he like literally has one paragraph on this, but actually when you went back to the sources, you saw that actually living standards and issues about public spend, and actually quite interestingly, it was actually arguable that the median unionist was actually more interventionist than median nationalist. That despite again, how history gets rewritten, the old age pension and public provision of railways were seen as unionist arguments. Again, unfortunately, people in Northern Ireland and Ireland generally, people say they know too much history, and the actual fact is actually they read very little history. There's a lot of half-truths. That's as close I do politics, religion. That's as close as I'm coming.
As Graham knows, my interest in this stuff is with the history part especially is the depiction of the Irishman in popular English culture and literature. That's my big thing, and especially around that punch Irish man, and you know how he moves from Ger Opera to caveman to you know Frankenstein's monster and that sort of thing. But there's a wonderful cartoon. I think it's around the time of the Home Rule crisis, when it's got little Ireland, you know, with a tiny little purse, right, and ragged and all this sort of thing, and John Bull with a huge purse full of money, you know, a huge money purse, a huge bag, and all it says underneath is your choice. So you know, completely agree with Graham that the economic stuff before has been forgotten about.
One final question, if I may. This is from Frank McCabe. Aodhán Connolly mentioned that the Northern Ireland Retail Consortium did not support the Northern Ireland Protocol because of frictions it created. Therefore, is there any workable alternative to the Northern Ireland Protocol? You know, and in fact, it's kind of the question: where do we go from here?
I think if there's, we said that we didn't support it at the time. In fact, on record. It was splashed all over the Belfast Telegraph that it came out that the Northern Ireland, and even actually one of my claim to fame is Andrew Moore said it to Steve Barclay that Sunday, which sort of made my mum and dad happy. I quoted as saying that he didn't listen to Northern Ireland Business or didn't listen to Northern Ireland communities. I think, though, it is in law, and we have to deliver, we have to work within the constraints of the law as business people. Would we like to make changes? There are a lot of things that we would like to see change. That's why we continue to talk to the EU and the UK government. I think there's a lot of facilitations that are not being made at the moment that could be made. I think that there is also a lack of understanding on both sides about how strongly this is being felt in both the unionist and the nationalist communities in Northern Ireland, and the upheaval and instability that it's causing. For us, though, I think that a lot of this is going to boil down to them actually hearing from the horse's mouth what the concerns and problems of business are, and realizing that it is not as easy as flicking a switch. So that's one of the reasons why I was hugely delighted that both Michael Gove and Vice President Shevchevich agreed for a business consultative body on the protocol for Northern Ireland. So we look forward to seeing how that actually pans out. But all I can give is the assurance that ourselves and the Retail Consortium and everyone else around the table in the Northern Ireland Business Brexit Working Group will continue with that mantra of trying to make business in Northern Ireland more competitive and keep costs down for Northern Ireland consumers. That's all we can do.
Thank you. Graham?
No, I don't think I can add anything to that.
Okay.
I mean, sorry.
Well, I mean, the only thing that I could add is that, given that the business community is involved, I mean, finally, at least evidence is being looked at, which is really rather good. I mean, what we suffered from the whole period of the Brexit debates was that businesses had just no voice. And now we're seeing some of the impacts of that in Northern Ireland very significantly, but also elsewhere. So those voices are increasing. So finally, evidence perhaps is going to be looked at and some changes could take place. But just one very small bit about what happens to trade in particular, since after all, this is what we're talking about mostly, and the impact on consumers. Of course, some of the figures that we see about how much trade, I think there was an earlier question about trade perhaps with the US and others, but rest of the world, Northern Ireland, about 16% I think it is, more or less. Most of it, as I said, goes to GB, and 15% I think to Ireland. But of course, a lot of the GB trade was directed then to EU. So those figures are not, which is about, I think, 14% again, which is, 8% for the EU, if I remember correctly. But a lot of it would be going through GB as it did before. So there is trade is changing already in terms of how it's directed to Europe. So those figures that we've been looking at, on which we're basing quite a lot of our forecast of what may happen, are going to look very, very different as businesses are trying to sidestep some of the problems that they're having at present. And that needs to be taken into account. So in other words, the evidence is shifting as well. So we have to bear that in mind in whatever decisions are made in terms of changing things for the future.
Right. All we can say with any certainty is that Brexit is not done. It will continue to rumble on. And I suspect that sort of when we get into the next election in 3 years' time, that these questions will still be sort of building about, and no less sort of passion as a result. So without further ado, I'd really like to thank the three panelists, Vicky, Pryce, Aodhán, Connolly, and Graham Brownlow, for sort of your participation. It's really welcome. Thank you for everyone for watching and sort of bearing with us. And I hope that you've enjoyed the presentation. I believe it will be sort of available later on if you wish to sort of look at the highlights again. And I wish you a good day and hope to see you all again soon. Bye.
Sure. Bye.